There you go.
I'd like to call the October 2021 meeting of the Airport Commission to order. The first line of business is the proof of posting a notice. So Mark?
Posted on the bulletin board out front at the airport terminal building, and through our listserv, as usual, we have distributed that. And where's the other spot we always? Oh, and it's of course on our website.
And it's posted at the airport.
Right.
I don't have it on the agenda here, but Mark, could you also call the roll, please?
Call to order and roll call.
Yes. Hey, sorry.
It's all right. Michelle Bond.
Here.
Mayor Brar is not present. Alder Burke.
Present.
Present. Alder Foussard. I do not. Oh, there's Luke. I assume you're there. He and his friend. John Halleck is here. David Lorman is present, and Kevin Munson is present. So we have 6 out of 7 present.
Okay, perfect. Thanks. You can tell I'm dyslexic, and my brain and my eyes are not connected, or I should have caught that. So the first part of business is the approval of the minutes. I'll give everybody a chance to take a quick read through it.
I do have one very minor change to ask to make. At the very top, I think it unfortunately is a little confusing right now, where it says Burke joined the meeting. It says it under chairperson report, but I did vote for the meeting minutes.
Yeah, I meant to move that to a different spot. Sorry.
Yeah, so I think it just needs to be above that, because
Yeah,
otherwise the 7-0 vote doesn't make sense when you look down at later votes.
Yeah, I thank you for catching that. I had intended to move that, and I was just going to delete it, frankly, because it's irrelevant. So,
Right.
I mean, you weren't there technically at the roll call, but I'll just put it up above the minutes. So that's fine.
Okay. Then if with that change made, I would recommend approve, or I would make a motion to approve the minutes.
Okay. So Robert makes a motion to approve the minutes. Do I have a second from someone?
Second.
David seconds. So a first and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, let's call a vote. All in favor of accepting the minutes, please say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Okay, the minutes have been accepted. The next thing up is the chairperson's report. The main thing that's not down below this by itself is the internet service. As you know, we had at one time Spectrum came in, or Charter, whoever you want to call them, and did a couple of paid installations, and we had a couple other people that were interested in it. I had talked to Charter and Spectrum to ask them again if they would consider putting the infrastructure in the airport, and they said nope, they're not willing to do it. If somebody's willing to pay them, on an installation basis, they would come in and they would go out. So with that, as I told you last time, we pursued a solution with TDS. I went ahead and purchased the TDS service, which was supposed to be at 50 megabits per second. What was delivered was 25. The person that had asked us about the high-speed internet also had purchased it, and it only came in at 25. Subsequent to that, I contacted TDS and asked them about it, and they are number one, going to reduce the price, but two, they are putting in a fiber proposal, or an engineering for fiber, to put fiber into the entire airport hangar area. So to get 25 megabits per second, which is half, it takes a thing called a bonded service. And a bonded service is, it takes 2 pairs of wire each pair carries 1/2 of the load. So that would mean that it's 12.5 for each one, 25 in the total. If somebody wanted voice, it takes another pair. There's not enough copper there to do what needs to be done for the airport. They're going to be running out of copper. And so it makes sense for them to put in the fiber. And the fiber, we would negotiate that to be at TDS's cost. TDS can get funding for that because they are the identified carrier. People like Charter, they're not the dedicated carrier for geography, they cannot get any funding from the FCC. So the long and short of it is, we do have 25 megabits per second.
Yeah.
Fast. You can download your chips and file a flight plan and probably even do teleconferencing, but it's not as fast. And so we will get an estimate shortly, or we will get some form of agreement shortly, I hope, for them to put in fiber in the airport in the hangar area. So that's kind of where we're at on that. I'm following it and I'm pushing it, and hopefully I'll be successful. But it's too early to tell, but we will see. So with that, is there any questions about that specific information?
No, but thank you for all of your time put into this. It sounds like still a work in progress, but I'm hopeful that we'll get some good internet service out at the airport.
TDS is going to get very sick of me because I'm also helping the Dane County Rural Broadband Committee, which I just met this morning with. So like I said, TDS is going to be very tired of me very shortly here. So
John, they're going to find your inquiries to be tedious.
Tedious, yeah. Thanks, Pun Master, the punster.
So just for the notes, you said you anticipate an agreement with TDS to install the fiber at the airport at no expense to the airport. That's what
That is correct.
That's the takeaway. Okay.
Yes, because their infrastructure that they put in is inadequate to do the job. So I'm hoping that they will do it at their own expense. And you've got a copy of the email, Mark, where they've already queued up the engineering and they're pushing it through. So I try to get them to document everything as we go along, because it's very difficult to work with telcos and they seem to backtrack a lot if you don't have all your stuff.
Sure.
Okay.
If I may, John, what's the mechanism to make sure that they will get the agreement without proceeding?
Well, I've asked for the engineering contact, and also I will follow up with all of my contacts at TDS. And so, and there's quite a few of them. So I'll keep pushing on my end to try to get, to keep the project moving. Does that answer your question, Mark?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we don't have utility companies showing up and just starting work. That's
No, they won't. They'll, if you read the email, they're looking at the viability and the cost, and they'll then have to acknowledge that, and then they would put it in.
Okay.
By the way, speaking about putting things in, do we have an as-built drawing for the wiring or the utilities that are there?
I asked our engineering tech, Tom Weber, several weeks ago to prepare a map to that effect. I forgot to check with him this week before this meeting, but he was working on it actively a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
I don't know where it stands. I will follow up with you on that.
Interesting comment. Yeah, we should get that. When they were activating my hangar, they found breaks in the copper. And I was wondering at the time, I wondered if Charter had plowed through any of the wires, because if there's no drawings and there's no easements, how do you know, when you're doing that, whether or not you're cutting anybody else's wires? So that kind of crossed my mind.
Sure. Okay,
so with that, let's move on to the next item, which is the airport manager's report. So Rich, go have at it. Rich, are you there?
Our mute button. Okay,
Yeah.
I have this also, and I don't know if you want to look at numbers on the goat grazing and the budget wise or the the brush removal yet. I've got some numbers for that I could add at the end or whenever.
We'll wait till we get to that section.
Okay, very
Let's
good.
just stay with this report right now.
Very good. From August 26th through September 30th, 1921, 16 noise or overflight complaints, way down from past months. No reports are made using the city online reporting form. Apparently, there's been some issues about getting access to that, although I have had no problem, neither has our office manager. 5 via the city email, 11 via the phone. Again, upon investigation, the vast majority of reports were aircraft following the voluntary noise abatement pattern. Several reports for aircraft using grass runways and landing to the north. Several more were for aircraft following the FAA standard patterns rather than our voluntary noise abatement procedure. Have not seen this low a number of noise complaints since before the master plan process began. This is something that we would have seen 3 years ago on average for noise complaints. Okay, called and or emailed everyone that wanted a call back, and that worked out well. No aircraft accidents or incidents on the field. Again, one virtual safety seminar, we hosted it. I was actually the presenter when winter flying considerations had 37 area pilots attend. Airport maintenance. The gates are becoming very problematic. Capital Flight, their gate would not open when you would go and actually taxi, drive up to it and wait for it. The pressure plate is intermittent. We reset it. It worked for a while. It doesn't work apparently now. I believe the Capital Flight has just pulled the circuit breaker and left it open so their people can come in and out, but I'm not positive of that. They're 17 years old plus. We're going to be seeing more and more maintenance on that. The facility or the provider has been called 3 times now, and we don't have a time when they're going to be out here to be able to look at it yet, or didn't as of this morning. Again, AED have not arrived at the airport. The Knox boxes have not arrived at the airport.
Can I interrupt quickly and just elaborate on those?
Yeah.
So I did ask Steve Wunsch, our EMS director, about both of these today. He sheepishly admitted the AED has been sitting in his office and he just hasn't made the time to. He's got 30 priority items and it's on the list of 30. So he plans to come over with that. I asked him to do it within the next week.
Thank you, Mark.
What's that?
Thank you, Mark. We'll try not to have any heart attacks between now and then.
Well, I mean, that's the irony, right? I mean, it's like you'd hate to see an incident the day before it gets installed. So, so he is aware that we're anxious to have that installed. The Knox boxes, he and Mike Davis, he worked with Mike Davis to make sure they were ordered. We thought they had been ordered, but apparently they hadn't been. So he and Mike worked on that a couple of weeks ago. So those should be here soon.
Okay, very good. There'll be more on the goats, but they're very busy and they have essentially eaten themselves out of house and home. And they should be scheduled for pickup tomorrow. I want to praise Ms. Randall, Cara Randall, for doing a wonderful job, especially in coordinating the volunteers for this brush removal. We could not have accomplished anywhere near as much as has been done without the dedication of people that really want to see this airport succeed. We've got a lot of, actually a fairly small number of very dedicated volunteers, some of which really know how to run a chainsaw. Others are very good at moving things, using loppers, whatever else. Can't say enough for the volunteers that she's been able to organize. And then I've leveraged a friendship with one of my buddies who's got a forestry mower on a tracked bobcat and a tool cat. He was here again last night, moving and grinding a whole bunch of stuff. So takes really makes it possible, or well, it's a multiplier. What he did in one evening would probably have been days of manual labor. So it was good to have that done. Other news. We hosted the girls' camp, girls in aviation camp. 30 young ladies were here. for that event, again, run by Susan Schwab and another airline captain that I can't remember his name right now. And then we just did the Women in Aviation Day. Excuse me, that was the one that had 30 young ladies here. The camp actually had, I think, 18. Very well received, a lot of good feedback from parents and participants. And then 2 Young Eagles special events, above the clouds events, somewhat again for predominantly people of color, kids of color that just you don't see out at airports on a regular basis. So it was wonderful to have that. The 2 pair of sandhill cranes continue to forage. They stay mostly off the runway. And again, I was amazed. There is a huge snapping turtle who lives under the bank of the North Fork of the Pheasant Branch Creek. I don't know what that thing eats, but keep your distance. It's monstrous. And future events, safety seminar again, October 27, and another special Young Eagles event this Saturday coming up on the 9th. Any questions?
Yeah, I have a couple, Rich.
Sure.
First of all, with respect to the noise complaints,
Yes.
I don't recall historically having any noise complaints about the grass runway. Is that a misguided memory?
It is, John. A lot of times people, for instance, on Hickory Woods, if you're landing north, people will often run a real tight pattern. So they'll be 500 AGL above Hickory Woods on base leg or something along that lines. Now, they've got their power pulled way back, but, or not even Hickory Woods. It might be closer in where the, behind Capitol Ice Arena, the houses in there. So yeah, this has happened before. Typically, we don't see it when they're taking off to the south, which frankly doesn't happen all that often. But yes, we have seen this occur in the
And
past.
the reason I asked that, I was wondering if the noise complaints were stimulated by the recent discussions of enhancing the north-south runway, if they had any impact on it.
It may certainly have been, although no one made a report saying it was someone landing on the north-south. They'd simply said someone was, at low power coming down over their home heading to the east. So that I just it made sense that was the issue.
Well, if the quantity is equivalent to historic volumes, then the answer is probably no.
Yeah.
But if they haven't historically and they are now, then the answer to that question is probably yes. So what you're saying is probably no.
Yeah, we haven't seen, again, these numbers for probably 2.5, 3 years this low. So,
And the other question I had about the gates, are we bound to that vendor or can we hire a different one?
it's hard to find anyone to work on these old gates, and we will start looking for someone else that actually has some expertise. But this is kind of old tech, and pretty sure these were the people that installed the gates, so they know them in theory at least. But we can, if they're not going to be responsive, we can try to find someone else.
So can I ask who the vendor is?
I don't have that on top of my head. It's on my, we have a list of all the vendors. Greg, actually, our grounds guy, has been in contact with them, not myself directly.
Yeah, I mean, R&R might be able to help you out across Plains. And the other thing, if it's just something electrical, probably one of the commercial electricians could probably fix it for us too.
Yeah, well, with the sensor, the ground sensor issue, I think we might be looking at a little something more complicated. Otherwise, yeah, the rest of the stuff, when we put a new motor in, that was no biggie. You just had to order the motor and wait for it. So, but yes, I take your point, John, and we'll look for other vendors.
Yeah, I have ground sensors in my house all around. So if you come anywhere near my house on anything heavy, I know there's no gates, but there's plenty of sensors anyhow. So anyway, so then I had electricians put those in. So,
Okay.
All right. The other question was with regard to Susan Schwab and the others. What does Susan or one of the people associated with that, are they online? Did you want to give them 5 minutes or?
Well, I'm afraid they are, no one to my knowledge is online here, but I do have a few things that I'd like to read along those lines. Okay, let's just, if you don't mind, she sent me an email along those lines, and I knew so this is in her words. This summer, we ran 2 outreach programs at Maury Middleton Airport. Both were outreach programs intended to expose kids to aviation from underrepresented communities, specifically girls and kids of color. The programs were separate but complementary. The first, which had events in July, September, and October, were run under the EAA Young Eagles program as private special events. This targeted one-on-one program was run with the blessing of the EAA, Experimental Aircraft Association headquarters, and was labeled a model program. Susan's breaking some ground here with this stuff. A total of 25 kids participated. Again, we're going to have another one of those coming up this Saturday. In August, Willa Brown Aviation Academy was held at the Middleton Airport for 3 days. The first 2 days were held at MSN, so this was a longer program, about a 5-day program, exposing kids to the military and airline world of aviation, with the third day focused on general aviation at Charlie 29, Middleton Municipal, including flights with volunteer pilots. Total of 18 kids attended. Both programs have elicited highly favorable responses with good press coverage, as the trend in the aviation world, is toward more inclusivity. Both programs are intended to work toward that goal. We had some very good feedback. One parent was saying, "Thank you for this incredible experience. That your dedication to this program is so admirable. Thank you very much. We'll definitely be in touch." Let's see another. We were so happy to have our daughter out at Maury Field and participating in our Young Eagles special event. It was a pleasure meeting you both. I'm assuming Susan and company, and we enjoyed sharing aviation with you and your family on that day. Below is a link to the photos. I'm afraid I don't have access to those photos.
Yeah.
I do, but don't know how to access them. Anyway, we had some really good feedback. It was good events.
I'm going to ask one more question, then I'm going to turn over to the commissioners. With respect to the good press, but was this anything about this released to the press, or did we use Middleton Public Relations or whatever the city of Middleton's got to get press releases in the newspaper and all of that? I mean, it looks to me like it would be a good positive thing for the airport. Maybe, you should talk to Mark, and the two of you should be able to pass some of that on somewhere. And we could always use a little good press.
Yeah, I know the State Journal covered it. There was a Channel 3 or 3000 covered it, and I posted that to the airport website. I honestly believe the Middleton Times Tribune had a bit on it as well.
Good.
But not a heck of a lot. You're right. We don't. I tend to be hands off with these events and let people do their own thing, but we don't promote as much as we should. So maybe I should be more proactive with it.
Well, we should just pass it on to those that know how to do public relations and let them do their thing. We just provide them materials.
Very good.
Thanks, Rich. Commissioners, the rest of you folks, do you have any questions of Rich about any of the topics that he's talked about in the report?
This is Robert. I have one question, and it gets back to the gates, I guess. Given that these are 17-year-old systems and it's older technology, what would be the next steps if the airport commission wants to move forward and actually go to replacement, not just trying to repair and maintain old equipment? I assume that we would need to get some quotes and understand what the next steps could be then, right?
Yeah, I would imagine that there'd be federal money and state money available for upgrading infrastructure and security. Now, we have projects that are ongoing that will be done in the next couple of years, and we'll have a couple more projects. I think that certainly there's no reason to pay the city and the enterprise fund to just foot the entire bill if there is federal and state monies available for that. And I think we should approach Josh with those ideas. And I'm sure, John, you're thinking exactly the same way as I am on this. But yeah, that's where I would go. I think with most of this infrastructure, we're approaching its 20, some of it only has 10-year shelf life supposedly, and we've stretched it, but 20 is certainly at a point where we can justify replacing it to the state and the federal government. And they're invested in having security at small airports. So I would think that would be a good project for the state and the feds to get behind.
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts when I think about this is I think, what is it that would be replaced? Obviously, the frame, the fencing, all of that is pretty standard stuff. The chains that pull it back and forth, pretty standard stuff. The sensors that are under the ground probably don't change much at all. If it's anything at all, it would be in the small control box. And so there may be a newer solid state control box, which would be a fairly straightforward fix if that in fact is it. But you may, when the gate people show up to replace it, I guess I just casually ask them the question, is this something that needs to be replaced, or, is this something that, has a 25-year life? I really don't know. I mean, I've had garage door openers, last an awful long time.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, these are out in the environment, in the weather. The moving parts eventually wear out. My guess is if we could simply swap out new parts for old and new motors in and new chains and whatever, that would be the most cost-effective method. I'm concerned that they are probably not even manufactured anymore. They're somewhat limited. I mean, you're running a pipe on large pulley type rollers. These things do eventually wear out, and the sensors that are in them are on the older side as well. I don't know, John, it's a very honest or a good question. Can we just have it rebuilt and refurbished? That would be a lot less expensive than replacing it. I don't have the
I would
answer to
just
that.
ask the question of the people that maintain them. What is
Yeah,
the
we
useful
will.
life, and what would be the migration path? And my other question would be, how are we maintaining these things? Who oils the chains? Who greases I mean, are we maintaining the stuff? I mean, a lot
Yeah.
of the stuff at the airport, I'm not convinced it has had the attention that probably should have had. And, are we actually maintaining this stuff?
Yeah, well, I'll bring that up to Greg, but I know we have in the past been following greasing those things in spring and fall, and
Okay.
looking over, trying to do the preventive maintenance as was spelled out, but there really wasn't a heck of a lot involved with, when we bought them, there wasn't a whole do this at this time, do that at this time. It's just basically common sense.
Mhm.
This isn't on your agenda as a decision item, but I think it's appropriate to, you're flagging it as an issue, and staff can do some legwork and provide you with options for the next meeting for discussion.
Yeah.
The only comment I would add is that in my experience over the years, the gates, there's 4 of them, right?
Yeah.
5.
No, 1, 2, 3, 5. There's 5.
Yeah, and I haven't driven through the 2 that go to, I've never activated those anyway. But the 3 that I'm familiar with, of the 3 that I'm familiar with, which are the ones off Airport Road, east and west, and then the one off the frontage road going to the main hangar area. Of those 3, the one on the east end with the 4 hangars opens from the right, and it would be nice if that opened from the left where the keypad is. So that is something we should consider in the future, because it's not what I mean? It's opposite what how the others operate.
Yeah.
So that would be nice. Instead of just swapping it out, it would be good to have those operate consistently for user
Well, we
expectations.
could do a little research on it. Definitely.
Yeah.
The only problem I've had with the gates is in the wintertime, the keypads, they'll get
Freeze
frozen,
up.
water will get in them and they won't
Right.
work.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I've had
Why
that
don't we do
happen.
some legwork for the next meeting and
Yeah.
investigate? Josh is on the call, in case you hadn't noticed. Josh Holbrook is on the calls. He's, I'm sure, been listening to this and will anticipate a phone call from us first thing in the morning.
Okay.
Great. Thank you. I do think, yeah, it's not on our agenda, and I get that, but I would hope that we can explore some of these things so that information can be brought back to this commission at a future date.
That's a good question and a good comment, Robert. Thank you. Anybody else have any comments on Rich's stuff?
John, I had one thing to add, given the comment that Rich made early in his report about somebody having difficulty accessing the noise complaint line. I
Yes.
had our IT director for the city work with that individual. It was an individual issue. It wasn't a system issue.
Okay, very good.
So
Okay.
just to clarify that for the record.
All right, perfect. Thank you. Okay, if there's no other comments on that, let's move on to the airport financials. There's nothing overly exciting here. I think all of the income is pretty much on par. We did get a bonus on the repayment. We've talked about that before. Everything else is pretty much as advertised, with the exception of the grounds maintenance. We budgeted 35,000. We used only 8,000, and we've got 3 months to go. So there will be some of the airport maintenance on the grounds with regard to brush clearing, and that will help flush that out. That'll grow. I still have a question on prairie maintenance. And the question that I have with that is and I guess this is to the city. So this is a fee we pay the city to mow the grass outside or take care of the grass outside the fence, between the fence and the road. And my question is, why don't we just mow that ourselves? Why would we pay $2,500 to do that?
I'll check with our public. Are you asking me or Rich?
Yeah, I am. I mean, yeah, you're the city face right now.
Yeah, I better turn my screen off then.
I can answer that, John, but
Go
yeah,
ahead, Rich. Why don't you? Otherwise, I have an
Okay.
answer to Rich.
those berms, at least most of them, are prairie plantings. And we're not supposed to mow them. And so I don't, and occasionally, about every other year, they get burned. I think in the fall or maybe early spring, they'll get deadheaded or mowed down. But no, it has been, we basically maintain just the inside the fence and then the parking area, and the city maintains the rest of it.
I understand that, but my question was why?
That's a good question.
Why don't we just do it in-house? We could do it a lot cheaper.
Well, again,
And do we have to keep the prairie plants? Or could that potentially be seeded, I guess? Put grass seed in and just mow it as grass, like everything else on Airport Road.
right.
Rich, I can help you. So years ago, when we developed the airport, there was a initiative, I don't remember, it was probably by Penny Klein, our public lands manager, to try and do as much native plantings as possible. And I believe that still is a leftover from that. I mean, that's why we have the prairie established there, as well as next to the terminal building. It's one of Rich's favorite features at the airport, as I understand. And I know some of the other hangar owners are not too thrilled because they feel there's some rodents that are associated with the prairie. So if you'd like, I can check with our public lands, with our Parks and Rec department, the director, to see what their preferred practice is right now for the prairie.
Yeah, I mean, I would ask if is it a potential option, to put grass there and to be able to take care of ourselves. Excuse me. The problem is wildlife that lives in there, especially rodents and things that eventually get into the hangars. And the problem with rodents and hangars is they seem to love aircraft. And what they leave behind is not real helpful to aluminum. And so, you're right, we've had people ask us about it over time, but I'm just curious, we've got this line item for prairie maintenance, and it's like, well, would we be better off putting it in grass and just mowing it? That's
well, and
this is an honest question.
This doesn't mean it's Rich's, as Rich noted, the focus for the airport manager and staff is on inside the fence, but
Yeah.
the city will still charge things to the airport fund if even if it's using city crews.
Yeah, but
So-
can we just mow it ourselves?
Understand, but prairies are not, I'll follow up with you. I'm not a prairie.
Yeah, if it's not a prairie, if it's grass, then we can mow it, because it's, I assume that, Lexus and all the rest of the people are mowing theirs up to the sidewalk.
Prairies have other benefits. I know they're concerned about rodents and visual, there's an aesthetic issue that some people have, but they do promote stormwater infiltration. You don't have to spray them for weeds.
Mhm.
I know that weed spraying is something that happens around quite a bit, and I think there's concern with that. So that's why prairies are a more natural way to manage the landscape. And there's obviously wildflower and bees and birds and benefits like that. So I will follow up with you about what the city's current policy is. I'll just
Okay, I think it's fair. It's just that I've had this question, and other people have had this question, and it just seems like it's something that it's worth talking about.
Well, I would add one thing, that prairie has essentially been unmanaged. It's got bull thistle in it. It's got just ragweed. It's got a lot of things that are not desirable. And, through a very sporadic mowing, but no real maintenance that I can see has happened out there. It's degraded itself to where it's not really a prairie. It's just
It's really not that attractive, so.
I'll find out, and we don't have to, we can discuss it next time if you'd like.
Yeah,
I'll
not
ask
a
her.
problem. Does anybody have any questions on the financials? I'm gonna add one more thing that I didn't realize until recently. And I had a discussion with Susan about stormwater management and assistance from the city. And her comment to me was, since the airport is an enterprise fund, it's not eligible to receive any money from the city. And I said, well, what makes it an enterprise fund? Well, an enterprise fund is defined as a profit-making entity that's capable of supporting itself over the longer term. And I find that interesting, seeing as how that there is no airport that I know of, in my knowledge, in the United States that doesn't receive money from local government. So I don't know who decided to make this an enterprise fund, but it may hurt us in the long run. So that's just a comment and an observation. Yeah, Mark, go ahead. You got that look.
Oh, I'm just listening.
Yeah. So anyway, so that was just a thought that I had, a comment. Okay, hearing no additional questions about the finances, which are pretty straightforward. The next item up that we had was the development plan to migrate from lead to unleaded fuel. So I can give you kind of the high line for that. So
we had brush removal as item 2. I don't know what agenda you're looking at,
Oh,
John.
I'm sorry. I'm looking at, I apologize. I was looking at I didn't go all the way further back. So the next one is the update on the brush removal. Thanks for correcting me, Mark. So Kara, she's online. She's going to lead the discussion with that.
Yeah, good evening, Chair Halleck and everybody else. Good to see you again. Tonight for this meeting, we are about 90% done with the brush clearing around the North Fork of the Pheasant Branch Creek that runs through the airport. We have some more work to do that'll occur over October. And so I'm anticipating, and there's also a request on Chair Halleck to do a final report at the November Airport Commission meeting where I can summarize everything. I think today, and we've got the photos that Chair Halleck has put together to show some of the stormwater, one of the significant areas that was infiltrated with a lot of invasive species over the last 7 to 10 years. I think what I wanted to do is just, kind of refresh people's memory about how this all came about, particularly because when you're working with Mother Nature, as we have, and particularly dealing with floods that have occurred in the last decade and dealing with invasive species and the weather and things like that. And now in bringing in something natural like goat grazing, we can make estimates, but it's a discovery as we move along. So if you remember last year, I mean, my profession is in healthcare, and with the pandemic, I was sitting a little idle, and I'm a pilot. I love being at the airport, and Rich and I came up with something creative I could do, which was clearing the fence lines with me and my loppers. And once you get out to the fence lines and you begin to see what was occurring on our waterways, we got together and decided we needed to really do something about this. And concurrently, I had been researching about goat grazing as method of brush removal. It's very environmentally friendly. It's very cost effective as far as human being hours and equipment hours. And I had brought this to the table. O'Hare Airport has been using this consistently, and Atlanta, Hartsfield Jackson, JFK, and I thought, they're doing something right if they're using goats. And so I got tuned in on that and did a lot of research. I met Ben Roble of Vegetation Solutions, and Rich and I and Ben got together and we came up with a plan to deal with the overgrowth that is running through our airport, and it's an important part of the watershed. And so for me personally, I had two overriding commitments. One was to be efficient and cost effective. Everything we need to do is about the bottom line, but it was also about being environmentally sound. And I mean, some of you know that my parents were instrumental in creating the Conservancy back in the 60s with Mayor Wally Ballman. And so I've grown up cleaning out the creek, and here I'm back cleaning up the creek, on our beloved airport. And it was perfect timing because it was an opportunity to also bring something really positive. I've been really impressed with Rich and his commitment to, being as environmentally friendly as possible, which also happens to be efficient. So what you see here in the photos being displayed is one of the one of the trickier areas. This is the southernmost view just off of the taxiway. There are 3 tunnels that go underneath the runway and the taxiway that have been silted in over the years, but primarily after the flood of 2018. So one of the things we discovered as we went through this, as the goats started clearing a pathway for us to get in, it was like we kept seeing, wow, this is really what we're dealing with. Not only invasive species that are clogging the waterways, but we are also dealing with some damage from this flood that has really started to back up things on our airport and then even into the farmland beyond. So it became, obviously we're dealing with a bigger issue, and I know Chair Halleck is going to address that as a second item. But what I really wanted people to get a sense of is how this is really a multifaceted, project. First we had to get into these areas, and that's basically where the goats came in. What they do, like in the old prairies, that in tandem with fire, grazing and fire helps to take down the invasive species that are in the way from accessing other things. And I don't know, Mark, do you have those 3 photos? 2 of which I had shown at a previous one. Yeah, very good. So what I wanted to show you as an overview, this is a section from the hangars facing Airport Road. What you can't see behind that thicket is the bridge that goes over the North Fork of the Pheasant Branch Creek. We're facing south, perpendicular to Airport Road. What you're witnessing is a combination of the thickness of the overgrowth. You can go back up, Mark, for a second. In the background, the tall trees of what have grown very quickly over the last 7 to 10 years. What you're seeing in the front, the willows primarily that are about 5 feet tall, that was a result of, we brought in a forestry mulcher that we had anticipated renting from McFarland's in Sauk City in April, and they came through and forestry mulched a good portion of it. Unfortunately, they didn't take it all the way to the ground as we were anticipating, so there was some debris we needed to clear up. But what you're seeing is the regrowth and how quickly in 4 months, this is what these willows do. And so this is the day before the goats arrived. So we had this, and then we can go down to the next one, Mark. This was after 1 week in the middle of August. They arrived on August 16th. We did nothing with obviously the other trees, and they just came in and completely have cleaned out, the thickets that are there. So Now we have access as, you know, human beings with our tools, whether it's a chainsaw or loppers or a handsaw, we can now move quickly through, you know, the brush to get through the other areas right along the waterway, which is on a descent that you can't see in this photo. So as we were moving through, it started to reveal the remains of the debris that was left from the forestry mulcher. And what I'm really wanted to convey is the teamwork that we've created between Rich, you know, the farmer north of us, with volunteers. We have the farmer was very, very helpful in coming in and cleaning up the debris from the forestry mulcher. So we have large piles, if you've been out to the airport, of combination of the wood and the dirt that we are going to attempt to burn later on. But his partnership was essential because we had his heavy equipment that again helped us clear the way to be able to get in further. And that's
You're
that's
referring to Larry Wagner, right?
yes, Larry Wagner. Yep.
Right.
And I'm really pleased about, you know, creating that positive relationship. It's a win-win because the more area he helps us clear, that helps us on our bottom line and our budget. It helps with the big physical moving, but it's also clearing more field for him to harvest. The closer he can get to the waterway is the more we have farmable area. So that's what we're trying to do, is create pathways around these waterways that we can either address with our, you know, airport mowing, or it is farmable for Larry. So that was a team effort. And then if you go down one more, Mark, please. The bottom picture that I have here is, this is where we're at now. That was what was behind everything. And what you're seeing is, as we were able to get through what the goats did, we got in with our chainsaws because there have been rocks littered all over this that was part of, you know, an erosion control effort. And Rich mentioned he had a friend who actually brought in the same forestry mulcher that we had hired out in the spring, which I don't believe McFarland's charged us for this. They actually, it was about $900 a day, and they basically used it for training. So we were able to, you know, utilize those funds, you know, push them forward. With Rich's friend, we were able to do the same thing, saving us again about $900 to $1,000 a day by pooling our resources to people who just want to contribute to the airport. Rich's friend is not even a pilot. So, and they just love to come play with their equipment. So what you're seeing is not only the trees that have been felled by hand with the chainsaw, but underneath that was a whole layer of another set of trees on this east side of the bank that Todd came in and just munched up with the forestry mulcher. Now there's still more work to do, obviously. These trees will get munched up and then also put into piles, and then burning is on the schedule for this fall if the weather conditions are favorable. Otherwise, we'll do burning in the spring to help complete the removal process. And then we move into the phase of the regeneration process. And we can talk about that a little bit. I'm sure there's some questions on that. There was something else I was going to add. I don't know if, let's hold those pictures. Mark, I sent you a couple other pictures of that pond. I know John had one in his stormwater link that he showed.
It's down below. Okay. Yeah, if you've got any photos you want to add to that library, obviously, Carrie, you figured out how to add them. Just add them to that library.
Yeah, I will start doing that, and then I'll let Chair Halleck know when I've added more. But this is really what I wanted you to see, is if we look at those photos, let's back out for a second here, Mark. This was after at the tour. If you take a picture at the first couple that I have there, where they're green, go up above, even the one in the center, just click on that one in the center. That one right there in the center is actually a video that I had put in there, but this is basically right on top of that drain, where this is a east facing view where John was taking the pictures facing south. But this is the kind of stuff that the goats plowed through first, and then we would go down and then transform it into what you see that reveals the, you know, the damage really to the waterways below. But you can go ahead, look at, they push each other out of the way to get the best spot. But you can back out again, Mark. And I believe everybody's had access to these links, but what I was trying to show is how thick the foliage is in the beginning and how the teamwork, that one in the middle where it looks more sparse. Yes, this is along the, that's what it looks like after they've been at work for about a week. maybe even less on some of these areas. So they go in and they just, everything within a 5-foot, AGL, they clear out so we can go and maneuver our way through with equipment, which I'm sure some of you have had experience with brush removal. You know that if you're maneuvering with a chainsaw in hand and it's running and you're trying to move through here, that there's a potential for injury. And when you get rid of all the foliage, you're reducing the weight of what we have to move around and makes the work a lot quicker. But they do take breaks. Digestion needs to happen before the next phase of clearing occurs. So this is the digestion phase. And then if you look at the bottom where you can see the photos, one John put on there which shows everybody looking at the waterway, and that's the one that I've got that shows that same box elder tree, and there's a maple and some others that's now removed, and with some hand clearing of the waterway as well. I spent a lot of time pulling brush out of the waterway that got pushed in through our process of clearing. I just want to add just a few statistics around the volunteering. I'm really glad Rich stressed how much our communities come together. And to date, we've spent about 240 hours in mainly brush clearing on the waterway that needed to be done one way or another. 10% of that was human time dedicated to moving fences or prepping to lay the fences. We have to clear a 4-foot swath through the brush to put the fencing in. So only about 10% of those hours were really towards setting up for the goats. But what that translated to was about $1,000 savings for what normally Ben would charge for setting up the fences himself. He's trained me, and then I've worked with both Rich and another volunteer for moving the fences when we need to. And we've built a lot of trust up with Vegetation Solutions. So that saves, it saves quite a bit. He doesn't have to run here. He can be down at O'Hare where he's got a herd of 200 and be at the water treatment facilities in Chicago while, we can manage it right here at this airport. So the volunteer hours of all of that were about 26%. And even though it was a few people, it's really effective when you have, several people. We would work in teams, especially when we get to the pond area that you saw a little flash of. I'd like to kind of shift to that photo from my email, Mark, where it kind of shows the span of what we're dealing here. So that's an east facing view on the bottom. That's a west facing view on the top. It just lets us see, what we've got left. We've cleared most of the north side by hand with the goats. You can't tell from the relief here, but there is sometimes a 10 to 12 foot drop. At the west end, it's a direct straight drop. And so with the contours of this pond right now, it is not possible to use equipment other than hand saws and chainsaws to get in along the edges consistently. You may be able to go in the winter and take some things down, but what we'll be dealing with is the regrowth. And that's where this project, it really takes about 2 to 5 years to turn an area that's eroded and covered with invasive species into one that is manageable through using seeding and native plant species and a combination of grazing, mowing now into the areas that we could get into, and then of course, some hand clearing will always be necessary until these waterways can be reformed, which I understand can be a long-term project. I'm open to questions. There's a lot I could share. I'll share some more in November when we have a clear picture of the entire project. The one thing I do want to stress about the invasive species versus native, that kind of came up in something Mark was bringing up earlier. The end goal here is that this is mainly sustainable on its own. And the only way that happens is if you can transform from the natives or from the invasive species to native plant species and grasses. And the reason being is invasive species, once you keep cutting them off, whether it's through equipment or through grazing, burning, or all of the above, what happens with invasive species, they put all of their energy into the foliage. So the more you do this, you starve the root and you kill it. Native species are different. They put all of their energy into the root systems, which prevents erosion. You can burn them, you can graze them, and they come back with effervescence. So we have had conversations with Adaptive Restoration, which is the same group that the city has used in other areas. That would be who we would trust to work with for advisement as we move forward, looking at the finishing part. But really, we have done the heavy lifting that in a short period of last year, basically, we cleared 2 areas that don't need to be done again. So all the work we invested last year is now manageable by airport staff and mowing. So this area is going to take a little bit more work, ongoingly because of the terrain that we're dealing with and the erosion, and that will get addressed in the stormwater issue. So I'm open to any other questions. Rich, if there's something that I have forgotten that would be important to add, let me know.
Well, Cara, I thank you very much for very comprehensive and good briefing. I would add, until we could see the silt, the damage that was done probably in the flood of 2018, we didn't know what we didn't know. We couldn't get in there. It was so thick. Part of the reason it silted up was the overgrowth in that waterway,
Right.
not allowing the water to flow as it was designed to do. So by opening that up with the goats and the volunteers, now it's wide open, it's clear. Only the center pipe has any access underneath that creek. The other 2 are silted in to the point of being useless practically. Until we could see it, we didn't know it. And by doing this, we can actually get in there and see what needs to happen.
My question is, 17 years ago, this was all clear. And I don't know how it got like this. How come we weren't cutting, mowing, burning on that? 7 years ago, we did it again. And we're right back where we are. Are the designs that we got from the BOA and Mean Hunt not maintainable? Did they design something that we cannot maintain on a year-to-year basis? And we need to redesign something? Or is it we just haven't spent the energy to do it?
I can answer at least part of that, John. Initially, this was designed, all of that area that's now mostly soil was all rock. And it was designed that way so that to minimize erosion. You couldn't get any type of mechanical mower in there except an articulating arm brush mower. There was, under past administration or whatever, we didn't have the funding to try, had to really work hard to get that initial cut that was done, and it just grew up. And again, it was after 5 or 7 years. You're able to mow it down, but there was no maintenance because you couldn't get in to do it. There was no concept of grazing at the time. And then it just went because, again, there were other projects and we couldn't hire or didn't want to hire or didn't have the budget to hire that articulating arm to come in and again do kind of a buzz job on it, but not really anything that was sustainable. I think now with the way the soil is filled in there, we have the opportunity, if we can contour this, to where we can mechanically take care of it, as well as combinations in the areas that aren't accessible. We can burn, we can get the goats, and we can do manual, chainsaw. But what as Cara said, we've done the heavy lifting in this job, and we've done it basically on deferred maintenance for the last 7 to 10 years. So
that's the key. I think we haven't maintained. That's the point. And I worry that it's going to go back if we don't. We need to get to a point. I look at this photo that's up on the screen. It's relatively flat. We need to get to the point, I think, where we can mow and burn all of this. I have a Bobcat with a flail mower on it, and there isn't any of this stuff that you've seen that I can't mow. And once I mow it, it doesn't come back for years, and then they burn it. I just would like to get it to where we could get, it's not a very big area from an acreage standpoint that it can't be done a couple of times a year.
Yeah,
and minimal amount of effort.
Yeah, I agree with you, John, but also an area that I didn't mention is a lot of this is wet, big part of the year. So you would sink the forest, the Bobcat or whatever in there and have to dig it out. We have to wait until we can get in there. And then in the winter, when it is frozen hard, often you'll have too much snow to do much work on it. But yes, you're absolutely right. We didn't have the money and the manpower. to do the maintenance on it prior. I think now that it's at a point, it'll be a lot easier to sustain than it is just to let it go and then do it again in another 7 to 10.
Does this need to be redesigned so it can be maintained?
I think so, because if you look at the picture, does not do it justice. That bank goes very steeply down to that waterway. You can't mechanically mow that. If we contoured this as the go across the pond more, or the airport road to behind electronic theater controls and the meander and the way that's been contoured, there are areas where you can mow right down to it. And the holding ponds over even further downstream, I think the city mows on a regular basis because it is level or contoured and easier to come down, not in a big drops. And well, they can just get a regular mower in there and keep at it. So that's, if we could get this to where it was contoured as opposed to just having eroded and cut bank, I think we'd be in a much better situation.
Yeah, well, I mean, we have to, I mean, you're right. When you look across to the south side of Airport Road, it's the same creek.
Yeah.
And it's very manageable. It's very maintainable.
Mhm.
And I mean, we're just gonna be chasing this forever. And honestly, this is a stormwater problem. This is not an airport problem. I mean, we're really not engineers or equipped to do it, but I mean, if Josh is on the line, I guess my question to Josh would be, you know, I mean, has this been designed to be maintained? I mean, how do we maintain this, Josh?
Well, if it was set up with rocks, originally it was not set up to be maintained.
Okay,
I assume that those boulders were all like 6 or 8 inches.
Or bigger, yeah.
It's not meant to be maintained if that was the case.
Yeah.
so the plan from, it was what, just to let it grow?
No, I don't think that's the plan. I mean, you know,
I know, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but
no,
I'm
that's
just trying to figure out what we were supposed to, what was the thought process?
I don't know. I mean, well before me.
Okay,
I don't plan your runways to crack either, but they do.
I know you don't. Yeah, it's just, I was, yeah, it
I don't know
seems
either.
like
I mean,
we need to get the right person in here, once it's cleared, to make sure it's maintainable.
URS, keep in mind that URS did the airport design back in the early 2000s. It was a different firm, not Mead and Hunt. So, and I don't know what their best practices were back then, but that's 20-year-old, you know, in 20 years, we have better understanding of all sorts of things.
Yeah, but we
So-
redid it 7 years ago, didn't we?
No.
Oh,
the-
I thought-
The area
Yeah,
that
oh.
is, I'm sorry?
Yeah, we mowed it 7 to 10 years ago, but we didn't redo anything. We just mowed it.
The area that, if this was designed with rocks, and I don't have the memory about this.
No,
but
no, that wasn't,
That's
that
not.
wasn't, Mark. No, the rocks were the waterway further
Oh.
down. This
By
is
Airport
left
Road.
over from Quiz, yeah, this whole waterway underneath the airport where the 3 pipes were all the way to Airport Road was simply rock, heavy rock. And
Like here.
yeah, and you can see parts of the rock sticking out yet, but most of it's been silted through and over, which actually is to our advantage, because then we can actually, if we contour it properly, we can get in there. But you can see parts of the rock that are there. No, the pond you've got up there is a Quisling holding pond that they used for the sod farm to run their pumps, and that's been washed out and never maintained. And I don't think that ever was anything other than connected to the waterway. There was never any design to it. Remember, we put this airport together on a real tight budget, and
That's true.
that other stuff wasn't done.
Yeah, well, maintenance is always a, you know, it's a big part of everything. If you don't maintain something, it's gonna go to hell, to be honest with you. So we need to, that's why I broke the agenda into 2 parts. The first part is just clearing it and maintaining what we clear. But I think there's a bigger problem here, and that is, how do we reestablish the waterways? And if we have to do any contouring so that it can be maintained, that's a much bigger project.
Right, right.
And it's gonna include who knows what, this is a navigable waterway. So now you got all those permits and silting, and I could see this thing could go off the chart. And frankly, we're not qualified to do it. And I'm not sure the BOA wants to do stormwater maintenance, so. But anyway, we could talk about that in the next step, but I think you've done an excellent job. We can see what we've got. We have to be able to maintain it without spending tons of money. I mean, we have to be able to mow and burn. I mean, that's the two basic tools. And, you know, the goats are great for optics, but they cost a lot of money over time. If there are other means, we should use the other means.
That's one of the things in November that I will show you, John. They actually are very cost effective over time. And so in November, what I'd like to present is the plan for maintenance going forward, because absolutely, we didn't go through all of this work right now to just have it go back to where we were. I mean, we're definitely on to, okay, how are we going to do this effectively? One option is as the waterways as they are. What do we have at our disposal without changing, you know, the contours of the waterway? And then if the waterways could be contoured, this is what it would look like for maintenance. So I will provide that at the next, you know, meeting, so you can see where we're looking moving forward.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you, I'm not totally sold on the goats, as I
I
said.
know.
I'd like to see a test, maybe a section cut aside where we would mow and burn, and we would trial it against, you know, maybe a smaller project. So we could actually do a comparison of two reasonably equivalent areas. So one doesn't, you know, have advantage of the other. And that gives us enough information to give us the pros and the cons and what works and what doesn't work. And it takes the guesswork out of it.
Yeah.
And so, you know, that would be part of my thinking anyhow, is just what are our choices? Have we explored everything? You know, and do we know what that is? So put that into your thinking
Yeah,
cap.
exactly. That's good to think about. The terrain actually will dictate, you know, what our choices are, what limits our choices. But
Yeah,
thank you for,
just do something equivalent and say, okay, here's the pros and the cons, and what's the worst that can happen? The worst that can happen is we got to do a little extra work the following year. So, but it would be a good test. That's my counsel. So,
well, thank you. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to, you know, kind of take this on and
Yeah.
present it. And I'm always available for, you know, questions, you know, personally at, you know, at the airport if people have other questions, comments, or concerns. But thank you all.
Great, it's great work, and now we have to figure out, you know, how to maintain everything, you know, with money, you know, with whatever money we have, and just there's so much to be done, you know, and
Right.
it's a really tough problem. So, commissioners, do you have any questions that you would like to ask Cara or Rich? Any comments?
Hi, this is Dave. I just, I think I appreciate all the hard work that you've put into it, Cara and Rich. I was out there last weekend and I rode bicycle all the way down and around and through it. And so it's an enormous job. And I guess my only comment would be, so what can the commission do long-term wise to help the airport and airport management through this process, other than coming up with huge amounts of money with an unlimited budget? Is this something that we can keep as an agenda item to help discuss, manage the process just over time, over the years ahead? So we always see to it that we keep funding and people and resources moving in that direction, as opposed to maybe, you know, letting it kind of stack up. Because I think as our chair stated, I absolutely agree, you know, managing the waterways and what to do with the waterways and getting into changing the shape and the banks wow, I mean,
Mhm.
that's huge, that's expensive, that's complicated, you know, and we have runways and taxiways and other things and lighting that are important. You know, I don't know if, you know, City of Middleton Water Resource can look at this, get involved. Maybe it's their problem. I mean, the silting and some of the damage, that's probably from the floods, I would imagine. So again, why is that so much of an airport problem when maybe it's a bigger issue? So that's kind of where I'm just thinking.
I met with the city, and we can talk about that, more about that when we move on to the next item about the remediation and maintenance. I think it's a good idea, David, to have under, you know, an ongoing annual budget related to this. You know, what did it cost, or what are we allocating? What do we use against it? I mean, I think that's just good management practices for everything you do. I also think it's important to do like an A/B study. Let's try one method against the other and compare cost and effectiveness, right? So we don't put all of our eggs in one basket. And then, you know, we can make our best possible decision. But not maintaining the airport is not an option. We have to maintain the airport. And we have an obligation to maintain the airport. And so, but I think cost control and being aware of the steps and highlighting, putting the spotlight on it, you know, so everybody can see, certainly makes it a more valid process, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's great. You know, both of you. The other thing I'd like to add, what became really crystal clear to me, I mean, when you're there in the muck, in the middle of the trees, and you see the magnitude of what we're dealing with, it's clear that this has to be part of cost of doing business. We have a waterway running through our airport, and that isn't going to change. And yet the waterway may change, but we still have the obligation to keep it clear. So, you know, I'm not a budgetary person, but it was really clear to me that there's got to be a portion dedicated to, you know, for grounds work, whether it's, you know, city funding, airport funding. That's not my issue, but it's so clear that this has to be a part of cost of doing business, or it will go the way that it went, you know, before, and we'll be back where we started.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good segue to the next item if no one has any question.
Rich has his hand up.
Yeah, just to comment, John, the heart of the matter, and you hit it right on the head, is that waterway was never designed to be maintained. It was just put in there to drain and take care of itself. And obviously it doesn't take care of itself. So we're kind of stuck with trying to fix it afterwards.
So let's kind of move on to, so what do we do next? Okay, so there's two phases to it. One is we remove the brush and we try to keep it clear. The waterway in and of itself is part of a system. We don't have any more materials. I'll just talk through it if I can. Is part of a larger system that takes care of the city of Middleton and the water. It takes an expertise. And I would like to see the city take 10 foot off of each bank and then what's in between it to maintain it. I mean, they have an engineer for stormwater on staff. Hopefully they have some budget available. And, you know, it's part of the entire Pheasant Branch system. We just happen to have part of it go through. To that end, I met with Eric, Mark, you guys can give me, I think it's Severson? Sorensen, sorry. 7-year-old memory. In any event, he is the city's engineer for stormwater. I think he's been there 6 months. I met with Mark. I met with Rich. Carr, I think, showed up a little later on. We met with Larry Wagner. We met with everybody and said, okay, what do we have? And I think everybody agrees that this is a bigger problem than an airport problem. The problem within the problem, however, is that the city has no manpower other than an engineer. And I might be being a little harsh here, and I apologize for that. The city has no equipment. And effectively, the city has a budget, but they're not sure how they should spend it. So I don't know where and we're an enterprise fund, which means, oh, we shouldn't be giving any money to the airport. Which I personally find is problematic. I have the names and I haven't had a chance to follow up on it. There's just too many things to do. But I have the name of the Dane County person in charge of stormwater. But I think it's a little embarrassing to ask other governmental agencies to try to help fund something when we won't do anything for it ourselves. So I'm kind of at a loss.
I'll take the chairs and go get an
Michelle, we
umbrella.
can hear you.
Good, Michelle.
I think she's talking to somebody else. Michelle,
I'm
do you want me to
sorry.
mute you? Oh, she
My
muted.
apologies, sorry. Thank you.
No, that's not a problem. So,
John, just to clarify, when you say the city has the budget, are you referring to the stormwater fund?
yeah, they have a fund, but I think it's debatable how it's to be spent.
I would defer to Robert and Luke on that, but there's been discussions at the council level about that fund, and those are more
Okay.
policy discussions.
Well,
But I didn't want to interrupt you, but I just want to clarify.
No, I think it's a good segue to Robert and to Luke. Guys, how can the city help us here?
I think the first thing, I mean, let's define what the problem is. We can refer this to other committees all the way up to finance and common council. And I think you've already done a fantastic job of starting to define what the problem is. And I'm glad you had a chance to talk with engineer Sorensen on this. But basically what we have to do is define what is the ask before we start going to talking to Dane County, because I agree that's probably a step too far at this point. What we do is say, well, what would this cost? And then say, why is this an airport cost? We did some legwork. We figured out that ballpark, this is what we think needs to be done. We want to dig out the silt. We want to have a widening of this waterway to the 3 pipes that go underneath, so that the water actually uses all 3. This is what we think needs to happen, but we don't think we're the right group to do it. And we want to refer this to whether it's stormwater or whatever. And then sometimes you refer to one group and they say, well, this isn't us either, but eventually it finds a home.
Okay.
And then the city can deal with it with other committees, other commissions, and like I said, eventually all the way up to the people with the money, which is finance and common council. So we're starting down the right path. Don't get discouraged. We just need to say, what do we want to have happen here? What do we think we want to have happen here? And understand that some other group like stormwater might come in and say, well, that's not the path we're going to go, but we have the alternate plan, an alternate proposal that will get you what you want. So we're going down the right path. Let's just flesh out a little bit more what we want, and then I'll be happy to send it to other committees or take it all the way to the common council.
In my conversations with Susan, our parking lot conversation, I said the city is really obligated to take this on because we believe that potentially this problem of clogging that we're looking at right now is contributory to the potholes that are created from the water being backed up and saturating the sand and whatever under 1028. Remember, we fixed potholes there twice. And that may be because hydraulically, this fluid isn't flowing exactly the way it should. Now that's a hypothesis I have no fact to back that up. But, we also have in our agreements with the FAA that we maintain the assets. And, and because of that, this could be part of a means to get to that. We don't have the engineering. If nothing else, Eric and the city is the engineering for this, because they know what rules and what it needs to look like. Obviously, he's an engineer that deals with stormwater. So can we come up? I mean, I'd be interested in hearing from Luke too on this because you folks represent the city, but can we come up with some kind of a motion that we would refer this over to the city? And the city could then start taking this on. We could get release the engineering done and some estimates done, something to where we can engage with the city, since they, like I say, this is part of the Pheasant Branch system. It's not just a little airport problem. I mean, Luke, what are your thoughts on that? Are you still with us?
Yep, I'm here. I'm just going through the budgeting process right now. The only kind of question that continues to rattle in my brain is, from what source of funds would this money come? Because we are exceptionally tight this year, and I don't know, unless we have a huge boom, I don't know if we're going to be all that much more flush with cash next budget cycle. But I mean, we can definitely refer away and think about how we might tackle this, but I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver.
I have a question. We built this airport on TIF funding. Is there any way that we can tag onto a TIF funding source as reconstructing the Pheasant Branch Creek north as part of that? That seems to be the only way to actually come up with a larger amount of money that would be required for something along these lines. And I don't know the details and the requirements of TIF. I realize that's development for business or whatever else, but that seems to be a revenue or a avenue. You guys can tell me whether I'm all wet or not on that.
Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, but the airport is not in the TIF district, TIF 5, correct?
It is in TIF 3.
The TIF 3. Oh, okay.
Yeah, but it's
Okay.
not appropriate to use TIF for maintenance activities. So I think that is the quickest answer to Rich's question.
But-
Our expenditure with TIF is supposed to facilitate property tax-based economic development, that sort of thing. And maintenance work it's hard to use TIF funds for maintenance. That doesn't mean it can't be done as part of a project. I mean, it's just, it would be a stretch to do it, but I can ask. I'm not our TIF planner. That's Abby and Mike, so I can check with them.
It isn't really maintenance. It's a rebuild to where it should have been in the first place. I mean, it is a reconstruction of the north branch of the Pheasant Branch Creek. But I'm splitting straws, I guess.
Yeah,
I hear that. I think the issue that we ran into also, for example, as part of this last budgeting cycle is the failure of 2 stormwater systems in residential neighborhoods that should have been functioning properly, but over the course of time, for whatever reason, they failed. And thankfully, we had access to the ARPA funds to be able to offset the cost. Otherwise, there just wasn't the city. But that was, again, a one-time fund. And so those projects were the 2 that most closely kind of resembled what we're describing here tonight. And again, that was we were only fortunate to pay for that because of the kind of the one-time infusion of funds.
The problem, I think, is if we don't resolve this, we have a potential to further damage the runways, and there's a potential further issue with stormwater upstream and downstream because this thing isn't flowing right, that could impact businesses and residents. This is a more global problem. And we're not engineers for stormwater. We don't know anything about this. And the city does have a department and does have an engineer. So, I think it makes sense for us to make a motion to refer this to the city for action. And that action could be, a consideration for engineering, construction, funding. Basically I just like to give them the creek. Like I said, if they could take 10 feet off of each bank and take what's in between, and the airport take everything else around, I think that's more than fair. Just take care of the stormwater part of it. So if we could come up with a motion that would refer this to the city, at least it starts that conversation.
Sure. Yeah, I don't know where it'll end up either. I'm
The
happy
city can
to,
figure it out. Let the city figure out where it ends up.
sure. Well, I mean, yeah. I'll I'm not sure if a referral to stormwater would be, I mean, the worst that I guess would happen is they say, we don't take this out because it's not appropriate.
Mhm.
But I think we could start there, and I can just go also after this, or after this meeting, not tonight, but after this meeting, I can also reach out to people in the city and try to figure out if there's a better path forward than a referral to stormwater. But I think for tonight, we can try that path and try to make a
Why don't we just-
referral to stormwater.
Why don't we just refer to the city administration and let the city administration make that determination?
Sure.
As opposed to us trying to make, I know the one place it doesn't belong. It doesn't
No.
belong with the airport.
Sure. Fine, yeah, I think we can refer it back to the city proper. I just, again, I'm trying to figure out what group is going to work on this. But I think that's fair. I just, when you say refer to the city administrator, he might give it advice, but the policy decisions and the hard work is done at the committee level. So I'm trying to figure out what committee level it would be.
Can we make a motion? Can we make a motion to go to the common council? Let them deal it from the top down approach?
I think Mark might have an idea.
Well, I mean, let's cut to the chase. I mean, this is a policy matter for the city council, guided by input from committees such as Water Resources Management Committee and the Stormwater Utility Board.
Right.
We have an alderperson, Mark Sullivan, who has a very restrictive view of how that fund should be used. And that's where the debate needs to be, is at the council level.
Okay.
So I'm just, and Susan can speak to this, Susan West can speak to this far better than I can too. I'm not,
I've heard
this
it.
isn't an area I work in, but I know that there's differences of opinion among the policymakers, and that's where that debate should be had.
Okay, then let's refer it to the common council.
Yeah, it seems to me that, it's obvious what's going on here and it needs to be. It can't be ignored.
And I mean, airport hangar owners are now contributing towards the stormwater fund. The stormwater.
Exactly. We're paying fees for the stormwater.
And so again, not the expert on any of this, but I think it's a valid question. Why isn't there a benefit from the stormwater fund to maintaining the creek channel on airport property and other properties? As you said, it's a system. It's not water flows across boundaries. It's not just unique to the airport.
Okay.
So that's all I know.
I have a question.
Yeah, Michelle.
Yep. So, with the flood, wasn't there some money put towards, some with the Pheasant Branch Conservancy and such? Who's handling that? Wouldn't that be somebody that we could reach out to too? And this could be a consideration with all of that?
It
I
will be
think
a decision by the common council and finance. So yeah, that's who we want to refer it to.
Yeah.
And as Mark said, there's sometimes differences of opinions of what are eligible expenses, I guess I would say. So let's refer it, I guess, to the common council and see where that takes us next.
Sure. So would the motion be, and I'll be happy to make it if you would rather not, we'd like to make a motion to refer the remediation of the portion of Pheasant Branch that runs through the airport property for evaluation, for engineering and remediation. I'm not sure, I might have repeated myself, but basically we want to hand off that piece. I mean, Mark, can you help craft, you and Robert and Luke? You
Right.
represent the governmental side. What does
I
that need to look like?
mean, I think I'm not sure of the right wording either. What we want to do is ask for assistance on something that we don't believe is an airport airport problem.
Yeah, if we have a motion and a vote, then we can get it officially to move on,
Right.
as opposed to a conversation. That's what I'm trying to get to here.
Mark, would you think that this might just be refer Pheasant Branch Creek remediation and maintenance question to the Common Council? Oh, you've got something up. Request guidance from the Common Council. Yeah, okay. So I think the motion is to request guidance from the Common Council regarding funding the remediation of the creek corridor extending across airport property. Does that sound like your motion, John?
Yeah, I think you have to get the word engineering in there because it's more than funding, right? It's regarding the funding, because you have the engineer, you really don't have to fund the engineer. Right, Eric's your engineer.
Well, you never know how that all works. A lot of times the funding ends up going to outside consultants, but yeah.
Yeah, I think, this will get the conversation started,
Right.
and the answer may, I don't know how you can ignore it, but at least I think we have to get it to the Common Council. And let them, they can look at the pictures.
Right. If John, can you see the motion that Mark is trying to?
Yeah, I do.
Wordsmith. If that wording looks good to you, I would be happy to second that motion.
Okay, so let me just look at it real quickly. Let's see. A motion of request guidance. Are we looking for guidance or assistance? I think the word is assistance, not a guidance. Assistance from the Common Council regarding the development of a long-term maintenance plan and funding. I take the word remediation and move it back. Okay, for the remediation of the Pheasant Branch Creek corridor extending through airport property. I think
What do
that's.
you mean by remediation of the creek corridor? I think that needs to improve it, to.
So long-term, let's see, so we're asking for assistance from the Common Council, that's clear. Regarding the development of a long-term maintenance plan,
How about this?
right? And the funding for the, we can use remediation or repair, either one, of the creek corridor extending through the airport property.
The restoration, is that what you're getting at?
Beg your pardon?
Are you getting at restoration of the creek
Yeah,
corridor?
restoration would be fine, if you want to use
An
that.
improvement?
Restoration works good for me. It's the
And
same
improvement?
concept,
Yes, restoration and improvement. It covers both ideas.
right? So we're requesting assistance from the Common Council regarding the development funding of a long-term maintenance plan for the restoration and improvement of the creek corridor extending across airport property.
And I said corridor intentionally because you were talking about a 10-foot swath on each side.
Yeah, I
basically.
mean, we don't expect them to take care of the whole thing. We're just expecting them to take care of the waterway. Everything wrapped around it is airport property, and we really need to take care of that.
Yeah, well,
Right, so you're not just talking about the channel, you're talking about like a little buffer of the creek corridor.
Yeah, well, I mean, because what's going to happen is they have to have a beveled part that goes down.
and
that's
and
part of it.
waterways move over time. So
Okay, all right. I'm happy to make that motion.
I'm happy to second that motion.
Okay.
I just have one question.
Yes, sir.
This is Pheasant Branch, correct?
Yes.
It is.
I think that word needs to be in there because from an equity standpoint, I mean, the rest of Pheasant Branch and everything it impacts gets dealt with. This is Pheasant Branch.
Mhm.
If this is not airport.
No.
Yes.
And I think that's fair. I think the Common Council would have known what we're talking about, but it never hurts to put it explicitly in documentation.
Mhm. I agree. Clarity is important.
Thank you. Appreciate it,
Clarity is
David.
important. Does anybody else have any comments or additions about this motion? Okay, So hearing none, I'd like to call this motion to a vote. All in favor of the motion requesting assistance from the Common Council regarding the development funding for the long-term maintenance plan for the restoration and improvement of the North Fork Pheasant Branch Creek corridor extending to the airport property, please say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Okay, and with that, the motion passes and it will go to the Common Council.
Great.
So then let's move down to item 4. And that is update on the planning to migrate from lead to unleaded fuel. So I'll give you a little bit of an update and then some work that Michelle's helped me on. So I have stayed in touch with the people at GAMI who is working with the FAA on the new G100 unleaded fuel. And 2 weeks ago, the FAA proposed to a thing called an AML, which is a model list that any airplane running 94 UL, I think it's 81 or MOGAS, would be automatically approved for the new G100L. So that's moving pretty fast. Originally, the G100L, as the news said, was supposed to go to Emory-Riddle. They were going to take 1 million gallons at each of their 2 campuses, but because of the cost, they kind of reneged on the deal, and that left GAMI and Fuel looking for somebody else. Surprisingly enough, Reed Hillview, which is the big problem in California, was going to the Swift 94 UL. As I understand it, is now going to use the G100 UL. So there's 2 fuels and they're rapidly evolving, which I think is important to note. And I think the other thing that's important to note is the FAA is moving compared to their typical pace at a lot higher pace. So I'm convinced we have a fuel now, and by the time we would have infrastructure, we may have a fuel for everything. But we know at least now we have a fuel that we could use. So since the last meeting, we have inventoried, as I said, with Michelle's assistance, all of the aircraft that are on the field. We've looked up what engine is in the aircraft. We put together all of the information associated with it, and we contacted all of the aircraft owners. We asked the aircraft owners, we also looked up the engines in aircraft to determine if they could use the Swift UL fuel. And we told the aircraft owners what we believe the answer to that question was. But we said, you need to tell us also. So of all of the aircraft on field, we asked them how much they used and how much, and if they would be willing. And the initial question was up to $1 more. And they kind of balked at that one. But the answer is, the sum is now 35,000 gallons of the 70,000 gallons we buy a year of low lead. So we could mitigate today, if we had a tank that we could put fuel in, we could mitigate 50% of all of the low lead fuel. And so we have that documented. So that was the first step. The first step was to find out, to quantify, is it bigger than a bread box? How big is it? So now we know that we have 35,000 gallons to deal with. Knowing that number, I asked Rich if he would care to give us an at the pump price. I'm very uncomfortable asking somebody the insides of their business and profit and loss. So, so the question was two questions to Rich, or actually there were 3 questions. One is, if you provided the Swift 94 UL, what would the price be? And Rich, you can jump in with me at any point on this, that the price would be equivalent to the low lead fuel that you're selling today?
It would, John, the cost of per gallon is slightly higher for the UL, but I would commit to matching our UL price on the self-serve rate on it. We'd only be able to sell it self-serve, at least initially, as I don't have a spare porter to run around with the 94 UL.
Yeah, I don't think the other options locally for Swift 94 UL are they're only self-serve.
They are only self-serve, you're right.
They're all self-serve, so we're not at a disadvantage there. The second question I asked Rich was, since we're reducing the number of low lead gallons we're buying from 70,000 gallons to 35,000 gallon, does it have a negative impact on the price of the low lead? Because quantity and volume are sometimes inversely proportional. And so I think the answer is no, right? Because we buy it in a truckload quantity.
Right.
Right.
We aren't a big enough volume user to get that quantity discount.
Okay.
But where we get is we can buy a full tanker truckload and that drops our price a little bit.
So our best economics is basically buying a tanker truck full of whatever, right? Not taking full loads, not partial loads. I also asked Rich, and it's interesting because I get two different answers to this. What to ask AbFuel, who is the distributor of the fuel, when we might get it if we wanted to go G100 UL, and the answer was, how long did they say, Rich?
Well, again, I'm looking at the supply chain, the people that we call up and order fuel from. They said 2 to 3 years at the earliest.
And my contacts at GAMI and UL said that we could get it tomorrow if we wanted it. Right. And so because they're mixing these batches up and they would add us to the batch, but it doesn't make much difference if we don't have the STCs to put it in, right? Which is what the AML will do. So there's a lot of technology to go on. The good news is it's rapidly changing. We won't know for months anyhow. It's going to take us a lot of time to be able to figure it all out. So now that we have a quantity and we have a price that we know that we're not going to disadvantage the pilots, we need to figure out the size of the tank. And so based on experience, Rich's comment was the tank needs to be 12,000 gallons. Is that correct, Rich?
That is correct, John. And just to give you an idea, we have been waiting on a load of 100 octane that we ordered a week ago, and we may get it on Saturday. And if with a 10,000 gallon tank, which can only pump down to 90%, you have a wiggle room of approximately 400 gallons from a full load empty. Now we have a 750 gallon porter, so we can stretch that, but a gas truck for the 100. But if you don't have a porter, we don't want to be known as the airport that's out of 94 UL all the time. We're much better off having a bigger tank so we can be flexible as to when we can get the full tanker truck load in order. It's much easier to operate.
I think the difference between a 10,000 gallon tank and a 12,000 gallon tank is not material, to be honest with you. It'll be a couple $1,000 probably, maybe a little more. I don't think it'll be material based on the pricing I've seen on the internet.
Right.
So
do
the next,
do it right. So do it once and do it right. There you go.
So do it once and do it right. So the next step, as I see it, is to be able to get some form of engineering and an estimated cost. And there are a lot of paths that we could do for this, for the town of Vermont and for a couple of other projects that I've done. We've asked for a design build. So basically we've asked, like, for the electricians that would do the work, is if you're going to rewire the town hall, what would it look like and what would you charge us? Rather than hire an electrical engineer to do the work. And I've done that in a couple of places. We did that on some big buildings that I own where the HVAC system was, $250,000, and we asked, everybody to come up with their best engineering and their best price. So I don't know who sells the tanks and who puts them in along with the pumping equipment. But we might, I mean, Rich, you would know better than me, but it makes sense to have somebody come out, take a look at it and say, you know, this is roughly what it will look like, and this is roughly what it'll cost you.
We've always worked with Metco, which is local, also Liquid Handling Systems. They have several names, but yeah, Metco is our provider, but we want to get a couple bids.
Yes.
And I'm sure they'll be pretty close. And the question is, do we want a containment or which is belt and suspenders, or simply a double wall tank that doesn't require a containment? Where are we going to slide it in? We've got to be able to fill it. So we can't just put it right next to the tanks that we have without figuring out either a different access to the existing tanks, or maybe taking it south, just south of the pavement where we park the porters, and putting it in that area. But yeah, we have to look at it, see where we have room to do this, and then get the engineering and decide how much money we want to spend on it.
Well, why don't you just have the folks, if you could handle this, have the folks come out and explain the options to you, and then give us some price on the various options. I don't know, the airport commission is savvy enough. I mean, I'm certainly not. I don't know which is the right way to go with regard to cost. That's why you have people do a design build. They're the experts, and they should be able to say, here are your options, and here's what each one of them costs. And then with that, then we could, the airport commission can then take a look at it, and then we can figure out, you know, how do we fund it? I mean, does this have to go to the BOA or Mead and Hunt to sign off on? But at least it takes us to the next step. So, I mean, that's my thinking. I mean, commissioners, what are your thought process now that you know where we're at today, and
Yeah,
where do you think we ought to go tomorrow, and how do we ought to get there?
this is Robert.
Yeah, Robert.
I appreciate all the work that's gone into this. I think we're going down the right path. Thank you very much to everyone. But yeah, I agree with you, John, that the next step is really a vendor coming in and saying, this is what we can do for you. And we looked at what you have here, and we would suggest one of these 2 or 3 options. And you talk to 2 or 3 vendors, you know, depending on, you know, hopefully you get a couple of good ideas, you get a couple of good ballpark costs. And then we as the policymakers can make a decision based on those facts. So if Rich thinks that that's reasonable path for him to take, that would be what I would ask of the FBO.
I'll get a hold of Metco tomorrow on this and try to get an idea, get an estimate. We'll have to look. There are not an awful lot of these places locally, and I kind of like to stay local, but we'll call and try to get at least 1 or 2 other bids on it, and get some options, think about, and placement. There's going to be some engineering involved with it, I'm sure. But yeah, we'll go ahead and see what we can do, get our ball rolling. And I know at some airports, the state has and feds have funded the tanks or the fuel farms. I don't know if there's money available for that. Josh obviously would have a better idea than I, but, and I'm not sure if our existing pump can be, and terminal can be expanded for 3 pumps or not. We'd have to figure that out. So those are questions we have to ask.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what we're doing now. We're doing exploration. We're finding out what our options are. This will have to go to bid because of the cost.
Sure.
Right, and so it isn't like we can pick a vendor, I don't think. But what we can do is get a number, figure out, you know, what pocket does it come out of? Is it doable? And then try to take it to the next level. You know, maybe this is something the city of Middleton wants to, since it's such a high visibility item, you know, this may come out of the green fund or one of those areas. I mean, I think the optics would be great for the city in view of all the Stop More Airport and lead signs that we're dropping, you know, 1,000 pounds of lead on the children every day. I mean, whatever the lunacy is, but anyway, so I think it would be good for that. I mean, again, this I asked the commissioners that are on the council, I mean, they would have to
Yeah.
give us some guidance on, what to do with it after we get it.
Yeah, again, I would say finance stuff will come later. Let's take the first step of getting the plan in place.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, it's a different question from a financial standpoint. If it comes in, $5,000 versus $500,000, right? I mean, versus $5 million.
Yeah, I think you're looking at $100,000
Yeah.
number, right?
So let's
agree.
get that step taken care of, and then the finance stuff, we could talk about it all night tonight, and we still won't have an answer. So let's kind of postpone any
I
financial
understand.
questions for a future date.
Okay. So, do we need to make a motion? I guess the motion wouldn't go, where would it go? I guess we can make a motion that Rich secure some prices. Do we need
Yeah.
it? I mean, Mark, you guys are the parliamentarians. What do we do
I think-
here?
If you'd like staff in the form of the airport manager and me, and
Okay,
or me,
Yeah.
to do some research, I think that's appropriate to document the motion and expectations that way.
So it would be like to direct staff, wouldn't it? Is that what you're looking for? Is that?
Well, I mean, your actions are advisory to the common council, so, I think what you're saying is to recommend that the council
Recommend.
take steps to acquire the 12,000 gallon tank and, whatever else, however else you want the motion to be phrased.
Okay,
But I
so-
think that's a reasonable outcome of this meeting.
Why
think
don't I take a first stab at the motion, if that's okay?
yeah, go right ahead, Robert.
Thank you. Yeah, I would, and thank you also, Mark. Yeah, I would recommend that city staff try to get cost and construction information on how to install a 12,000 gallon fuel tank for unleaded fuel,
Yeah, it's
At the airport.
12,000.
or whatever, sorry.
Yeah. And I think what we're looking for is some indicative pricing, right? Some indicative pricing and engineering for budgeting purposes.
Right, again, I don't want to get hung up on the finances so much.
Okay,
I want to just direct or
Okay.
recommend that staff create a plan to acquire these. And
Is that what you want, or do you, I mean,
let's see. Yeah, I think so. I think the plan to acquire it obviously is not going to be free. So getting the financial side of it is part of it. So I think that wording right there, proceed with a plan to acquire a 12,000 gallon fuel tank.
Mhm.
Or unleaded fuel.
For
Yeah.
unleaded fuel.
yeah, and there was one other thought that I had to develop a plan to acquire for unleaded fuel.
My other thought was, it's not just to acquire it, it's to acquire and install. Because we could buy a 12,000 gallon fuel tank and then have no place to put it.
Yeah. The unleaded aviation gas fuel tank, if you want to use unleaded.
So that would be my motion.
isn't that unleaded aviation fuel tank? Isn't that essentially gas and fuel redundant?
Or you could just say it's a 12,000 gallon fuel tank to transition to unleaded av gas or something like that. Because that's what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to transition.
I think what you had before, put after 12,000 gallons. I think
Okay.
after okay.
Go ahead.
I think it should be a 12,000 gallon fuel tank
Yes,
for unleaded
Av gas.
aviation gas.
yeah, okay,
Because
Perfect.
av gas, there you go.
that's I think the clear motion that I would make.
I certainly can live with that. Luke, you've talked about or thought about this?
I can live with that motion as well.
The rest of the- Go ahead, sorry, Luke.
Oh,
Continue.
no, I'm done.
Okay. I apologize for jumping in too quick. The rest of the commissioners, do you have any comments about this?
Who's seconding it?
So we have to have a second here.
I'll like to second this.
So Kevin's gonna second it, okay. So we have a first by Robert, second by Kevin. Any additional discussion from any of the commissioners? Hearing none, let's call for a vote. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Okay, it's a pass unanimously.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's move on to item 5, and then I think it'll go fairly quick here. So Capital Flight has requested that we they get an early start on 2 of their projects. I put together a form, and you know, I just took a stab at it, right? You could certainly modify it. I thought to myself, what would we need to know as an airport to make a determination of an event being consistent with the airport? And so that would be operations and safety, because you guys have all your other things that deal with fire and liquor and noise and whatever. The airport is only concerned about the actual operation and safety of the airport. So rock the ramp for 7/22/22. So this would be a party fundraiser, pre-Oshkosh land. The planned attendance is 2,500. The amount of on-airport parking, because that's the only parking I'm concerned with, or we should be, right? Because that's the rest of it, the city will deal with. So there's 75 cars and 125 aircraft. So there's a question then will be from Rich and Airport Management, is that doable? Will the airport need to be shut down? And they suggest that 119 for the day. And the entire field for an air show, which we haven't asked about, would be for an hour. And then I asked, how would the crowd and aircraft be managed to not impact airport operations and safety? And so the answer to that was FAA attendance, air show safety plans, fire rescue, and all the other wonderful things. And then I just asked for a couple of things additional. An air show, yes, there will be fireworks, and then there will be other activities. I'd like to ask a question about the form first. What else should the Airport Commission be asking an applicant that wants to have an event? Is there something here that maybe as we codify this form should be, we should add?
I think in previous ones, we always asked, you know, who's going to be directing people, traffic, parking, volunteers for that. And I think we always had answers on that.
Right. And so how will the craft and aircraft be managed to not impact? And so what they're saying is the FAA attendance, air show safety plan, et cetera, et cetera.
Along those lines,
Yes, sir.
this is Robert again. I don't want to duplicate efforts of other city forums. I love
Yes.
the fact that this is a forum for the airport commission.
Yes.
For have the information. But the questions I have, which I don't know whether we need this information or the city needs it, but would be insurance. Is there any type of insurance necessary? And if so, what is that?
Yes.
Police or emergency services, are there going to be, are they going to need, 10 uniformed officers to do something? I don't know, direct traffic, if nothing else. And then what David was saying too is, what's done with volunteers. But those are things that I think are useful information to have. Whether they're needed by the airport commission or just the city at large, I'm not sure. And I don't know what other questions are asked when somebody has to fill out an event registration form for the city.
I don't either. There's, what do you guys call it? The LNO? I don't know what LNO, whatever that group asked for.
I did attend the LNO at their review of the last event. And it seemed to be pretty comprehensive. They were asking about insurance
Okay.
and various permitting and on all of that. I think that's boilerplate for them, part of their form.
Yeah, I was trying to focus on airport
Yeah.
operations and safety.
The tourism department, which collects these forms, works closely with the police department, which staffs the license and ordinance committee meetings. And they've developed a form that's very comprehensive, assuming, applicable to events throughout the city. I think what, John, you're trying to do with this form is to have a form that's unique to the airport, that, recognizing the airport is a unique entity within the city. Are there any things above and beyond the city's comprehensive form?
Yes.
And, the city's comprehensive form doesn't necessarily, not all those things pertain to every event, but it's just meant to be a checklist.
Mhm.
So I think, John, what you're doing here is to specifically understand what the impact on the airport is. That's really what the purpose of this form is.
Yeah, that was my goal, kind of what I thought the process might be, is that the form would get filled out and then it would get signed off by the airport manager. And then it would come to the airport commission and then we could vote, we could ask our questions, vote yes or no. And, since we have the airport manager is with us today, we can ask them, Rich is, looking at this form and the answers, does this align with what happened in 2021? And is this something as airport manager you would feel comfortable approving?
Well, it's I'd like to add a few things to your form, John, but maybe more specific. What areas that I saw last year that were lacking was there was not a good coordination and parking of aircraft. Therefore, the aircraft were rather inefficiently parked. There was a lack of volunteers there, and especially control of traffic on the taxiway after the air show. There were pedestrians mixed in where they shouldn't have been on that taxiway, and not necessarily being at the air show itself. Well, they were, but coming from the hangar area down to the event and back. There was no control on that taxiway after the event and after dark. There was a problem with, there was no positive control. They did not have enough volunteers to do this, or they were not. Didn't feel there was a concern. There was potential issues there, and I'm concerned if this is going to be a bigger event, there has to be an action plan, not just for the air show, which the FAA did beautifully, and we're all good, and EMT was there, and we were all set with that. But the aftermath and again, the actual parking of the vehicles, this is a lot of people there. And frankly, they were all over the ramp. There was no control of keeping them on the grounds. They just wandered down. They were looking at airplanes. They were looking at hangars. It was poorly done. And if we're going to do this again, there's got to be a solid crowd control plan and a plan to keep the hangar owners from using the taxiway as a sidewalk. And bike run and skateboard run and whatever else. I have to give them great credit for what was accomplished. It was a good air show, it was good fireworks, all of that, but the execution lacked in that show. And I'd like to, if we're going to do this again, we got to do it right.
Well, I think I captured those ideas. And first of all, how many cars and how many aircraft? So my first question, if I was airport manager, would be, where do I put the 75 cars and where do I put the 125 aircraft? You got to go somewhere. And so you have to have a designated area. But then I think I captured down below is how will the crowd and aircraft be managed as to not impact airport safety and operations or operations and safety? which I think is what you're trying to get to.
Yep.
What does that staffing plan look like?
Yeah, the answer there that was given is, sure, sounds great, but we definitely need some specifics because that was probably the same answer that was done last year. So
Could be. So so to me, I mean, it sounds to me like before we'd make a recommendation to approve, this thing probably does need to have a place for the airport manager to sign. And then you can sit down with Matt and then, based on last year's experience, add more detail to it. And then it comes back to the airport, we would then approve it, and then the event would go to the city for all of their, whatever, however they titrate the damn thing into an event. I mean, commissioners, does that sound reasonable to you? Or is that too much detail?
No, I think this is great. It summarizes what's important. It sounds like there's a few more details that need to be fleshed out and maybe added to the form as standard requests for information. But this is better than looking at the current city event form, which is got so much information that doesn't apply to our group. So I think this is a really strong first draft that probably just needs a little bit further work and input from people who in the know, like Rich.
Yeah, I think it's what came to mind. So when I went through it, other commissioners, do you have any thoughts as to what's missing from this form, what the process should look like? I don't want to get too tangled up here and too much process, but there has to be some minimal process that we just can't have somebody show up at an airport commission and say, hey, I want to have an event. Can I have it?
I agree, it's a good idea, and my only question probably would be maybe for Rich is, so, say we're in the thick of an event and you don't like the way things are going. There's too many people meandering into no-go zones. I would hope or assume you have the authority to just track down the group or organizer of an event and say, you need to fix this now, right? Without it getting too complicated or too many people involved. I don't know if something like that needs to be stated up front to.
I think that's a great idea. The board might need to have the designated event manager.
Yeah, right.
As a point of contact. So if the things go south, we know, or Rich or whoever's there needs to know. Maybe we also need to add their cell phone number.
Okay, yeah.
Well, yes, I think the better planning and having more volunteers and having it tasked properly would go a long, long way versus, at a certain point, it was just, oh, everything's over and we're going to have a beer. So, yeah.
Well,
John,
I'm not opposed to these things, and I think it's important to help Matt run a better event. And the more questions we ask and the more things we write down, the better chances he will have of having a successful event. And I think a successful event is good for all of us.
could I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
From a city staffing standpoint, my question is, first of all, this is the first I've heard that, Rich, that you had concerns with some safety issues at the airport. I just want to clarify, there were no actual incidents. You were just worried that there was a potential.
There were no actual incidents that I'm aware of, Mark, but the taxiway was being shared with aircraft taxiing out after dark, people walking, people on bicycles with no lights on them, people in motorized vehicles of some type.
I understand. I just wanted to make sure that there weren't any actual incidents, but you're worried that there was the potential for conflicts, and that's what you're concerned about. So then my other question is, given that there were FAA people there, and I don't know how many, but it's my understanding there were several. Did any of them contact you about improper activities at the airport?
No, the FAA people were there for the air show. That's all they were there for. And that was all their concern. They were not I'm not even aware that they stuck around to the end after the air show was done. And they weren't up and down the taxiway to my knowledge.
I mean, an air show, I've been to EA Oshkosh, and I mean, there's crowds that get on airport property, and so people who run air shows obviously know that the public shows up and comes onto the airport and is in areas that usually they wouldn't be. So I would think the people who oversee an air show would be aware of where the crowd is located. You're saying that it's after the event is what I'm hearing you say, where there could have been some improvement with management.
Yeah, exactly right. Well, during the event as well, because people were, there was no control of the crowd. The crowd was all over the ramp where they should have been further east. They were in and around the hangars. That there was a lack of, I don't know, there was no perimeter, there was no control. Everything was wide open, and one person can't get a hold of. Yeah, there just wasn't anyone there to try to rein this in. And once it started, it's kind of like a flood. How are you going to be able to turn all of this back?
So between the Rock the Ramp event, which was in mid-July, and then the cruise-in event a few weeks later, did you share those concerns with the event organizers, like in terms of, did you anticipate those concerns that happened during Rock the Ramp? Did you then?
Well, there was some discussion. Rock the Ramp had Ms. Randall and a couple other people from the EA chapter volunteering and running a perimeter, essentially, and there was no issue in that. Now, it's also during the day, not during night. There weren't airplanes taxiing out. I mean, if you go to Oshkosh, there is no one on a taxiway that an airplane is on. You're not going to have pedestrians walking. You just don't see it.
Well, actually, that's not true. That what they did is, I was there and I crossed a taxiway to get to the Warbirds area this year. And what they did is they had a volunteer that blocked access across the taxiway. So
you're right, Mark. There is an absolute and positive control.
Right, but I just want to clarify that as long as there's volunteers and people that guide you to keep you separated from the air traffic, that does happen, but it needs to have positive control with the volunteers.
Exactly.
During cruise-in, which I also observed, I saw that cars were being directed very well, in my opinion.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Well, they had a much better group of volunteers there, and the car show people are used to doing this. They know how to block the cars in and do all of that. Right. I think if we could get some more cooperation with the EAA chapter, who knows how to park aircraft for a fly-in event, and have enough volunteers that are tasked with crowd control, and probably try to educate our hangar owners as well, because that was part of the deal, is people moving back and forth from the hangars to the event grounds and then back.
So your concern was mainly the air show at night. The cruising event sounds like you don't have the same concern.
Cruising event was well maintained, and like I said, they had people from the EA chapter volunteering to man barricades, essentially to make sure that everyone knew where the event was. And also during the daylight, so people weren't wandering about. Yeah, the cruise-in was much better managed.
Mark, can you scroll down to the cruise-in request? That there was an form for that.
I just wanted to understand better, because if you as the manager had the concerns, I think communicating them to the city and to the applicant who ran it before this meeting would have been timely. But I'm glad that we're having this discussion to make sure it's improved for next year. Because I wasn't aware of it. What's that?
Yeah, things continue to get better as you talk about it.
Yeah. Here's the cruise-in application we received.
So my observation here is the population to attend is almost the same. One's 2,500 and 2,000. So the amount of crowd control should be almost equivalent. The number of cars is much higher, at 350 compared to the other. I mean, so in terms of load to the airport short of the aircraft, there's quite a bit going on, and they're fairly comparable.
Mm-hmm. But it's during the day, which is nice versus night. It's car centric as opposed to aircraft centric, which is also people will stay on the grounds and look at cars. And it's real easy to segregate. You're not going to have people taxiing out and walking on the taxiway.
So it seems to me, this is Robert again, that another question should probably be, what are the specific hours of each of these events? Because something that goes into the evening hours has different requirements, it sounds like, than something that's fully in daylight. And maybe that would be something that would be provided, but maybe we need a specific spot of exact start time, exact end time. And then tied in with that is, what is the specific plan for crowd control before, during, and after the event to ensure that all participants and visitors are, escorted off property by the time, the airport needs to resume its full operations again. I think those are things that would be helpful for us, specific to the airport, to have that kind of questions asked and answered for us to have the best, most knowledgeable decision-making process.
Yeah, I agree. I appreciate those comments, Robert. It seems to me maybe like the next step is for Mark to take the comments we've made, modify this form that, was a rough draft to begin with, and then maybe to give it to Rich, and then have Rich meet with Matt and then flush it out and provide his approval. So the form and Rich's approval comes back to us. And after that, it goes pretty quick, I think. Does that sound like the right process, Commissioner?
Yeah, I think the form needs, this was a good first draft. I think we need a second draft created. I'm willing to help with that as well, if anybody wants assistance. And then absolutely it needs to be reviewed by Rich, because Rich knows the questions that I won't even think to ask.
Mm-hmm. Or he can meet with Matt and then they can discuss the details.
I'm talking more about the form in general. I'm not talking
Okay.
about any specific event.
I get it.
So what I'm hearing is getting at separating the aircraft and the function of the airport, keeping that intact, obviously the ability of the air, maximizing the use of the airport for aviation, which of course is the first foremost, and separating pedestrian traffic after events when the airport runways open again, the taxiways open, separating them, making sure that there's a specific plan for keeping those uses separate, keeping pedestrians separate from air traffic. I mean, that's what I'm hearing, the central concern of what Rich is saying. And I understand that, I get that.
Yeah, operations and safety. We want to make sure the airport runs, and then we want to make sure somebody doesn't meander out on a runway somewhere.
Right. Okay. I understand the direction. I just, okay, thanks.
Do we need any motion, or is just really, it's just kind of, let's take a stab at a updated version of that
I
request?
guess do a motion that, that we can make a motion that we can specify who's to work on it. And if Robert, if you want to participate in it in the second draft, that's great to me, or any other commissioners that wants to put a thumbprint on this, I think that's fine. But I think the motion would be for staff and commissioners to refine the form based on commission comments, and to have Rich meet with Matt and to go through the form to make any changes or recommendations for the next airport commission meeting. And we may find out in that discussion between Rich and Matt that there are other questions or modifications to the form that ought to be made. There's nothing like using a form to help validate how it ought to be written.
Right.
All right. Now, I have a suggestion here, because I'm in an awkward position as both a competitor of Matt's and, the airport manager. I think when I meet with Matt, John, maybe you want to be with me on this, or someone, so that we have, just, it would make sense. Let's put it that way.
I mean, Robert could do it. I'd be glad to do it. Any of the other commissioners could do it. I'm more than happy to do it. but I'm also happy to let somebody else do it. I think yeah, I mean, this is the difficulty of, this is like hiring your best friend to work for you. You
I'm
have
happy to be
able
part of the process too, Rich.
Yeah, you gotta be able to put your hat on, when you need to, so. David, your comment?
Affirm that.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to help out too. I'm nearby, so.
That would be good.
Yeah, I think David would be a great person to participate in that as well. So
So Mark, can we take this into a motion? If you tried to. So the components of the motion is that you'll modify the form based on our discussions. That Rich will meet with Matt and somebody from the airport commission to review the form and then make a recommendation to the airport commission at the November meeting.
My comment would be, this forum is going to be used for everybody. It's going to be objective.
Yes,
And so we should, leave names out of it really, because this is going to be used for pancake breakfasts and other larger hosted events.
there's no names in the form.
No, I mean in our motion.
Well, the problem is that Matt's already made a request.
Oh,
So
okay,
it's already bound into this and,
okay.
right, so request the staff to refine the form as discussed during the meeting for general use, right?
Yes, please put that in there. I just,
If we
I
get the
don't
general
want
use
Matt,
in there, right?
we're not singling Matt out, really. What
Right.
we're using, you'll appreciate this, John, in the software sense, he's our beta tester.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
Right,
So
good.
we're subjecting Matt to, Matt is actually helping us create this process.
And vice versa.
Yes, so, and he's giving us time to do it. So we appreciate his, his
Early-
advance
Yeah.
notice and all that.
So the motion is to request the staff to refine the form as discussed during the meeting for general use, right? So that after the meeting, that we're discussing the form, to redefine the form for general use as discussed during the meeting. So go up behind form to request the staff to refine the form for general use as discussed during the meeting, right? And to ask the airport manager, meet with the applicant and one member of the airport commission to address any missing details needed during any, let's say, to meet with the applicant to address any missing details. I don't know if we need the rest of it.
Well, that's the gist of what you're getting at. I think that was the crux of what Rich was saying as his concern.
Yeah, the goal is to refine it, discuss it with Matt, and make a recommendation at the November meeting. That's what we'd hope for.
Right, so you don't want this part in there.
Hey, I don't think you really need it, do you? I'll let the other commissioner.
I was just reinforcing the concern that came out of the meeting. But
Yeah,
to
I
ask
so
think-
you can do that when you refine the form.
yeah, I think we're fine.
Okay. So that would be my motion. Is there a second?
This is Robert.
Sure.
Happy to second.
Okay, Robert would second it, and then, so now let's take it to any general discussion that we want to have on this form. Any more comments? Improvements? If not, I'd like to call a vote for this motion. All in favor, please say aye.
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 And all opposed, same sign. And so the motion's passed. As I said before, my goal is just to get a minimum amount of process. It's not to make it difficult for people to get anything done, but we do have to have some process. So that is the last item of business on the agenda for tonight. So is there any other discussion about what we might want to talk about that we haven't talked about for the next one.
John, I don't know how, excuse me, I don't know how quickly this is going to progress, but the city has gotten back to me on my request for an extension of operating here as our airport manager and FBO. And hopefully by the next meeting, we'll have something to report. That might be something that could go in.
Yeah, since this is I've had this discussion with Mike a couple of times about a lot of these agreements are between the city and a third party, especially when it's an extension, of a pre-existing agreement. They're really just minor alterations. So I don't know if it needs to come back to our approval. However, it should. We should all be aware of what it is, and that would be kind of maybe as part of an update somewhere. What I'm the most concerned with is when we start mixing assets. So if we are buying buying a 12,000 gallon tank, right? And then there's certain equipment, then there's not other certain equipment, and there's maintenance contracts and all of that other stuff. It'd be good during this discussion to think forward and think about how we handle that in the future, if you will. But if the city deems it to be important for us to approve it, it will come back to us and we will weigh in on it.
You're talking about the airport manager's agreement, which isn't on the agenda. So the issue is whether that's on the agenda or not. Okay.
If Mike wants it on the agenda or the city feels that we need to approve that in the FBO agreement, then I say put it on the agenda for next time. And if they don't, and they feel that the extension is just normal part of doing business, then, we should just make everybody aware what it is and provide an update.
Yeah, I would think that should be on the agenda. It's an agreement that pertains to the operations at the airport, and it's a function of the airport commission to advise the council on airport matters. So
yeah, I'm good with whatever the city decides. We'll take their guidance. I mean, part of the role of the airport commission is to deal with any issues as directed by the city. And we will do that. Anything else that anybody would like to have or thought about? I mean, as always, email your comments or your thoughts, and we will follow up and incorporate as many of them into the airport commission meeting as possible. I think we had a pretty good agenda tonight and a lot of important topics, and gives us something here to work on. So with that, would somebody like to make the motion to adjourn?
This is Robert. I would love to make a motion to adjourn.
Okay, Robert makes a motion to adjourn. Would I have a second for someone?
Sure.
I would second that. Yep. Either or.
Everybody rushes to make a second to that one. Okay, any discussion? Hearing none, let's all make a vote to adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
Hi.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. I'd like to thank everybody for participating in another successful airport commission meeting. I hope you have a wonderful weekend.